this podium was built for Abdu. Let me just put a pair of eyes out here. And step aside so you can get a better glimpse of a different build to the man you've just been watching. Nice to be here back in your beautiful home, your beautiful state. I think it's been quite a few years since I've been here, and every time I come back, I think I ought to retire here. I just love the way life is lived out, but unfortunately, I think those are one of the dreams that you just keep dreaming about. I'm not sure it'll ever happen. But as long as I am able to walk and move and live and have my being, I'm just delighted to be able to come and visit such beautiful places. Thank you for your hospitality. Thank you, Waxer, for your invitation, and all of you who worked so hard to make this evening a reality. The fact that this is a packed auditorium tells us a lot of hard work has gone on before we got here. For those of you sitting in the front, my goodness, I can do that too, but I won't be able to get up after that. I have 2 titanium rods that are holding me up and just keep the lower half of my back upright, otherwise I would not even be able to stand here. I have 2 major back surgeries. It reminds me of a friend of mine who is now with the Lord. He always began every talk, I've knew for many years, and the first 2 minutes was always this story. He talked about this preacher who came to an audience and said, if somebody stood up and asked him if he wanted to stand or sit down when he spoke, he said, if you don't mind, I'm really tired, I'd like to sit down and speak. And then somebody else stood up from the audience and said, we're really tired too, if you don't mind, we'd like to lie down and listen. So if I see some of you beginning to recline, I'll know that you're beginning to lie down and not listen. The wonderful thing about being with a lawyer, as Abdu is you get to ask a lawyer questions and not get a bill at the end of the evening. That in itself tells you you've got a bit of a miracle going on here. The story is told of a lawyer and a doctor and an architect who were arguing as to whose was the oldest profession. And the doctor said, it has to be mine, because when God formed Eve out of the side of Adam, somebody had to sew him back. So the doctor said, my trade was called into being used. And the architect said, wait a minute, before that, God framed the universe out of chaos. So the framing of the universe was the architect's job. And the lawyer is sitting there laughing, saying, who do you think created the chaos in the first place? So you've got a man who's giving clarity in chaos, and a man who's giving you answers without any billing. He's a brilliant guy, an anointed guy, and just a thrill. His family is here, and just wonderful to have Abdu and Nicole and the children. Some of my other colleagues are here as well. Many years ago, I just arrived from a long trip. I'm pretty sure it was Bangkok to New York. It was one of those long hauls. And the good thing about that is that you look like your passport picture when you get off the plane. So I'd gotten off and I was looking for my departure gate. And it was there. I found the gate, but on the marquee it showed a different city. So I looked at the lady sitting in the corner. I said, is the flight from here going where I think it's supposed to go to Atlanta? Or is it going where the marquee is saying it's headed? She said, no, it's going to Atlanta. I said, good. So I turned around to go and get myself a cup of coffee, and I heard the sound of feet behind me, hastily following, and a tap on the shoulder, and it was this lady. And she looked at me and she said, excuse me, are you Ravi Zacharias? I said, I'm afraid so. That's who I am. She said, that is amazing. It is absolutely amazing. I didn't know you had questions as well. I'm not making up this story. Even though I was a little groggy from that long flight, I didn't know you had questions as well. Right from the time we are able to put words into sentences, we do 2 things. We start carrying weights around the house. Whether it's the chair or a toy or a teddy bear or somebody else's stuff, we lug things around. It's almost like we were made to be burden bearers. We carry these burdens physically. But beyond that is the oft-repeated word, why? Why? And the assumption in the mind of that child even though they are not processing it to the same degree of sophistication or intricacies, the assumption is that they will have an answer to their question. And that answer will conform to reality as it is. That the why will be given an answer, and the answer will conform to reality as it actually is. That's what truth is, a propositional reflection of that which is truly the answer to the question. Truth is so indispensable that if even a person says they no longer believe in the truth, they are either telling you the truth or they are telling you a lie. You cannot deny the reality of truth without assuming that truth as a category actually exists. You may as well be talking about a one-ended stick. The law of non-contradiction applies to reality. Two mutually exclusive statements in response to a question, both cannot be true without at least one of them being qualified in a certain way. It was Winston Churchill during the war who made this extraordinary comment. He said, truth is the most valuable thing in the world. It's the most valuable thing in the world. In fact, it is so valuable, said he, that often it is protected by a bodyguard of lies. Truth is the most valuable thing in the world. In fact, it is so valuable that often it is protected by a bodyguard of lies. And the wars that are fought are ultimately not just fought with weaponry, but they are fought with intelligence if you can get the enemy to believe something that is not true. If you can get the enemy to buy into your intelligence scheme and be deceived into thinking of something, as was happening in the Second World War, repeatedly, it became a game of intelligence triumphing over ignorance. Truth is the most valuable thing in the world. Some years ago, the former Israeli Justice Minister, Natan Sharansky, had returned to his homeland in Israel. And he had been incarcerated in the former Soviet Union and kept in solitary confinement for a long time. He asked for permission to come and visit the prison where he was once held. And there in this prison outside of Moscow, when he went, as he was about to enter that prison, this time his wife was with him, and she was going to walk in, and he put his arm out. He said, if you don't mind, I'd like to enter this place for just a few minutes, only by myself. Because it was in this solitary incarceration, all by myself, that I really found out what the most powerful things in this world are about. And so she gave him that privilege of going in and spending that time alone. Sometime after that, the battery of microphones confronted him to interview him. He said, before I answer any questions, would you allow me to go to the grave of Andrei Sakharov, the physicist who gave to the Soviets the atomic bomb? May I go and lay a wreath at his grave? And people wondered what on earth this was about. So Sharansky goes to the grave of Sakharov, the physicist who had given to the Soviets the atomic bomb, and he laid a wreath there, and then he fielded his questions, but he began by saying this. Andrei Sakharov said before he passed away, I always thought that the most powerful weapon in the world was the bomb. I always thought that the most powerful weapon in the world was the bomb. I have changed my mind. The most powerful weapon in the world is not the bomb. The most powerful weapon in the world is the truth. It is the most valuable thing in the world. It is the most powerful weapon in the world. Therefore, just think about this. The man who asked the most important question you could ever have asked of Jesus was asked by a man who stood in front of him claiming to have more power than even Jesus. Don't you know I have the power to release you? Pilate had said to him, you don't have any power other than that which is given to you, implying even this little power that you have as a puny, petty little potentate comes to you from the Almighty God in heaven. But Jesus looked at him and claimed to be the truth. And they that are on the side of truth, said Jesus. Listen to me. Pilate missed the greatest opportunity ever given to a person. In those 30 seconds, he looked at Jesus and he said, "What is truth?" and did not wait for the answer. What is truth? And he walked away. You know, we can think of truth in many, many ways. With the limitations of time, I want to talk to you about truth that we know in one way for sure, but in another way we actually struggle more deeply in that which we do not often think about as coming under the category of truth. So let me explain that a little differently to you. Truth comes first of all in propositions. If I make a statement in a court of law, the opposing attorney has the right to question me if he or she thinks I have not told the truth. And when they are looking for answers, they're looking for two things in that: whether my individual statements are corresponding to reality, and when all of my statements put together bring a coherent response to everything that has been asked. You understand what I'm saying? Individual answers correspond to reality. All of the answers put together have to be coherent. So the theories of truth move and swing between the correspondence theory and the coherence theory. Particular statements corresponding to reality, the total story coherent with reality. We understand that and we think about that. But oftentimes what we really miss out on is, what has truth got to do with meaning? The meaning of your life, the purpose of your life. Because the fundamental question you really ask, as I did at the age of 17 on a bed of suicide, why am I really here in this world? You know, Lord Byron said, youth is a mistake, manhood a struggle, and old age a regret. Youth is a mistake, manhood a struggle, and old age a regret. We are living today probably because of the capacity for the dissemination of information on a cosmic scale within seconds. We are now living not with old age having its regret, but youth themselves having regret well before they have reached the 17, 18, and 19-year-old mark. It's no longer youth as a mistake, manhood a struggle, and old age a regret. The young themselves are living in regret before they enter into what we would call young adulthood. Why is this happening? We must understand the nature of truth in meaning. Here's what Malcolm Muggeridge says. Please listen very carefully how he says this. In this Sargasso sea of fantasy and fraud, how can I or anyone else hope to swim unencumbered? How can I learn to see through and not just with the eye? How to take off my own motley, wash away the makeup, raise the iron shutter, put out the studio lights and silence the sound effects and put the cameras to sleep? Can I ever watch the sunrise in Sunset Boulevard and the sunset over Forest Lawn? Can I find furniture among the studio props, silence in a discotheque, love in a striptease, read truth of an auto cue, catch it on a screen, chase it on the wings of Muzak? Can I ever view it in living color with the news, hear it in living sound along the motorways? No, not in the wind that rent the mountains and broken pieces of the rocks, not in the earthquake that followed, not even in the fire that followed the earthquake, but it's in a still small voice. Not in the screeching of tires either, or the grinding of brakes, or the roar of jets, or the whistle of sirens. Not in the howl of trombones, the rattle of drums, and the chanting of demo voices. Again and again and again, I come to realize it's that still small voice. He goes on to say, the voice of God, if one can only catch it. Those are icons in the world of entertainment, live in this artificial world of plasticity. And oftentimes when their lives have fallen apart and everything around them has collapsed, we begin to see that all that was around them was a sham and ultimately a shame. Everything material that they actually had was something that many of us long to have, but they know better than anyone that there is really no fulfillment and no ultimate meaning in it. A man who took his life in one of the most sophisticated hotels in Vegas left this note on his dresser: "Here there are no answers. Here there are no answers." Well, what are the answers we are really looking for, folks? How do we find what Abdu was talking about, that point of reference, that point of unchanging truth, so that we can find the nature of ultimate reality? Where do we turn? May I quickly suggest to you that if you're looking for absolutes, you have to be able to define at least 4 categories of thought. And once you define those 4 categories, you will not only find that absolutes matter, but you will find therein you find your real meaning. Therein you find your real meaning. It was Lee Iacocca, the auto magnate, in his twilight years said this: "Here am I in the twilight years of my life, still actually wondering what life is all about. All I can say is this," said he: "Fortune and fame are for the birds. Fortune and fame are for the birds." He said, "But then I stand and I watch my little children or grandchildren coming towards me, and I ask myself this question: is that what it really is all about? Not fortune and fame. I look at the grandchildren, I look at the little ones, and I say to myself, is that what it really is all about?" May I suggest to you, he was on the right track. And the 4 categories that have to be defined to find meaning, and I'll have to race through this. Number 1, how do we define what evil really is? Psychiatrists are coming to the conclusion that some crimes are so heinous, some crimes are so horrific, that you have to give it only one word. No other word will describe it. We have to use the word evil. But the reason they are reluctant to do that is because immediately it brings a moral framework into reference. And the very psychiatrists who use this term says nobody knows where to turn for that definition. Nobody knows where to turn for that definition. You know, there's another thing they're wrestling with, the kind of a drug that will take care of post-traumatic stress disorders. You go to the battlefield, you've done things you regret, you hate what has happened there, you come back, you're living with nightmares, you can't go to sleep at night, and they can find, they're looking at some medication that will help you alleviate that memory and somehow help you block it out of your past. The problem they face is this: if we do find a medication that can erase all those horrific things you were engaged in, what about the rapist and the murderer who goes and rapes, goes and commits murder, comes and pops a pill, and is that the end of it? Evil. I remember years ago in the 1980s visiting Auschwitz in Poland. I'd never seen anything like that. I'd been to concentration camps. That was the first time I walked into a death camp, what used to be the death camp, where they were obliterating them at the rate of 12,000 every day. 12,000 every day. And outside the gas chambers were the words of Adolf Hitler: "I want to raise a generation of young people devoid of a conscience, imperious, relentless, and cruel. I want to raise a generation of young people devoid of a conscience, imperious, relentless, and cruel." And so we look at evil of that nature and we say, how can anyone have such a dream and such a goal? And you know what the mistake is, ladies and gentlemen? We look at that kind of ghastly, cosmic, massive evil, and we forget to look inside and recognize the evil that is in our own hearts. The Bible says everything that is in the world is the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Lust, greed, and pride. You take those 3 categories and you live with it, I live with it, and we better deal with it. So rather than looking out there at the horror of an Auschwitz, look at the horror of your own heart and mind and all the things that go wrong in there on a given day. Evil. Secondly, justice. The search for justice. And the young generation wants to find justice. You know, I have a friend who came upon some sorry times. He was accused of doing something which he vowed and swore he had never done. I was not there during the trial, but many of my friends attended it. I was traveling. And ultimately they found him guilty and incarcerated him for 35 years. It's a sad story. And a few weeks had gone by, and I drove from Atlanta about 2.5 hours to go and visit him. I'll never forget that experience. As you walk into that private quarters where they search you and take everything that can have any communication capacity, the phones and pens and all of that, they take it away from you. And then they open a door, and that door slams behind you, and you're in a long, dimly lit corridor, and you're alone. And they tell you when you reach the other end of the corridor, turn to the left, go up the stairs, there'll be a guard standing there, he'll be waiting for you. So as I'm walking even in that corridor, I said, for goodness sakes, I'm just here for half an hour, and I'm already terrified just as a visitor. So I went up the stairs, there was a guard waiting for me, searched me, frisked me again. Then he put me through another corridor, another guard, and then they took me in front of a glass and sat me down, and they said, the man you've come to see will be with you shortly. This was a man who worked for a Christian ministry, a peace-loving man, and as far as I knew, in my estimation, had no capacity to do what they had accused him of doing. So he comes with his handcuffs and his ankle irons, and all of a sudden I looked at a man I didn't even recognize. I didn't even recognize. In a few weeks, they had dehumanized him. And I looked at him and I said, I have many questions, but one question I have, why did you get the kind of attorney you did, who I hear did a very poor job of defending you? He said, Ravi, because I never dreamed that this thing had any merit to it. I never dreamed that this thing had any merit to it. I am an innocent man. I have not done this in 3 decades of his life. In his 70s now, he will never see the light of a free day again. All I want to say to you is this. The man claims innocence. A system found him guilty. Does truth matter? Does truth matter here? Is it important for just one life that we have truth and justice at the same time? And if what is being done to him is unjust, it's a cruel kind of infliction on a human being. I walked away from there unable to hold back the tears. Walked through that whole corridor again, and all of a sudden I was not terrified of that corridor. I just said, what a world we are living in right now. I got into my car, and before I could drive, I just put my forehead on the steering, and I cried and cried and prayed. Lord, what a horrible thing has happened if injustice has really been carried out in here. Evil, justice, thirdly, love. We have to find the answer for what love really is. Our world doesn't understand it, and here in the West we are more confused than ever. There is no such thing as free love. Chesterton says that's a black and white contradiction in 2 words. Free love is a black and white contradiction in 2 words. Love was never intended to be free. It's the nature of love to bind itself. It's the nature of love to commit itself. It's the nature of love to say I do and also I don't. What you say I do to, and the counter perspective involves what you say I don't in other aspects. Love is a critical need in your life and mine. C.S. Lewis talks of 4 loves. The love of God, agape, our relationship with God. The love of a parent, storge, protective love. The love of a friend or brotherly love, phileo. And the romantic and sexual love, which is eros. Agape, storge, phileo, eros. The last 3 can only find its definition once you understand the first, which is agape. It cannot hang with its feet in midair. It has to stand on the solidity of an unchanging, eternal love, which God talks about. There is no contradiction in Him. And that's why that simple verse, 32, 33 words, depending on which version. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in Him should not perish, but have eternal life. There are many aspects in that. There's the filial aspect of a father. There's the eternal aspect of time moving into eternity. There's the relational aspect. All of these and it is all built on a legal aspect. There is a moral law on which this world was built. And so the sacrifice of Christ became a necessary thing. Love. You know, in India, when I was growing up, India produces more movies than any other nation on the face of the earth. And some of those movies, when you see them, you know why they produce more movies than any other nation on the face of the earth. When I was growing up, there was no kissing on the Indian screen. All right? The fellow would generally be chasing her around trees and singing a song. And as soon as he catches up with her, the scene would change. So I remember somebody writing to an Indian comedian and saying, what's the difference between love on the Western screen and love on the Indian screen? He said just one word: trees. They just ran around like these. But you know, the funny thing, the entire structure of my culture in which I was raised was not based on romantic marriages, it was based on arranged marriages. I had people in my family who arrived at the wedding day without even knowing what the other person looked like. Horrors. Think of that. What are you in for? You don't even know what this person looks like. They arranged. And all of their movies are what? Romance. The heart longs for that flutter. It longs for that enchantment, that excitement, all the delights of eros. But if they ever move away from agape, then it becomes a plundering of what eros was ever meant to be. Evil, justice, love, and lastly, the absolute we must know is, how does one legitimately forgive? You need forgiveness. I need forgiveness. If everything in our heart were exposed to this whole audience, there wouldn't be a person but that they would hang their head and say, you've seen me like I never wanted you to see me. Forgiveness. How desperately we need forgiveness that can couple with an understanding of love and know what evil is and bring justice. And I say to you very simply, that only in the cross of Jesus Christ do we have that grace exposed. Evil, justice, love, forgiveness, whereas the one place in the world the four of them converged on a hill called Calvary. It is the cross of Jesus Christ that's the centerpiece of the gospel. There is no other worldview with a cross. There is no other worldview where forgiveness is given because of grace. In every other worldview, you earn your salvation or you earn paradise. Only in the Christian worldview is it a gift. It's a gift of grace because of the sacrifice that has already been made and paid for you and me. On the solidity of God's definition of evil, justice, love, forgiveness, converging at the moment of Calvary, as the price was paid for you and for me, we have the answers to what truth is really all about. And that's why the Son shall set you free. You shall be free indeed. He doesn't just say, I am the truth. He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes unto the Father but by me. If he were only the truth, you could talk about propositional correspondence, but the way and the life talks about coherence as well. And if you really want meaning, truth is not just propositional. Truth is also a coherent life on the inside. That was the one thing the Greeks searched for, which they never found. How do you find unity in diversity? How do you find unity in diversity? You know what their answer was? Create the universities. That's where we get the word university. The Greeks were looking for unity and diversity. Talk to an average university student today and ask them if they found unity and diversity. They're graduating from pluriversities. The disciplines have very little connection with each other. The only way you can find unity in diversity is to find unity and diversity in the community of the Trinity and the reality of that relationship in your own life. So, ladies and gentlemen, God bless you, and I just hope and pray that we can tease out these questions and find you some answers. My grandson, his name is Jude. He's 7 years old now. His vocabulary is terrifying. It really is. Really is terrifying. In fact, my daughter Naomi asked him a question the other day, and he said, "This is my hypothesis." 6.5-year-old at that time starts using the word hypothesis. You better keep a dictionary in the home. When he was little over 3, his mother lost her car keys and she couldn't find it. She slaps her forehead and says, "I must be losing my mind." And little Jude came in front of her and said, "Mommy, whatever you do, please don't ever lose your heart, because I'm in there." Don't ever lose your heart, because I'm in there. God has you on His heart and in His heart, and imparts that meaning by giving you the definitions of what ultimate reality is all about. God bless you, and thank you for being here.